And welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk. We're at the Tom Izzo Media Center. Michigan State had interviews Tuesday. This is where Tucker does his interviews on Mondays as well. Today, Jay Johnson came in, spoke a little bit about the offense. And it's strange, Paul, because Peyton Thorne comes in, Malik Carr comes in, Jay Johnson comes in, and they've got a lot to feel good about in terms of offensive production. They score 31 points, but they don't get a victory. Red zone, leaving some points on the table, short yardage, leaving some drives on the field, overtime, not getting any points in 6-7 plays in overtime. So it's strange where they can feel good about their stats and so forth, but like Tucker said on Monday, didn't finish in a number of ways. But it's kind of hard as we look to critique the offense and what's going on there. It's uneven, kind of like this whole season has been.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is what it is to a certain extent. I mean, because you've got good development going on. You've got, like, I've just looked at Keon Coleman's numbers this year, 700 yards receiving, 50 catches or something like that. So that's impressive. That kind of was overlooked. Last year we would have been all over that. Those are the numbers that Jaden Reed was putting up. You've got young offensive linemen stepping up. Gino Vandermark played a good game under the circumstances. Brandon Baldwin continues to improve as a replacement for Jarrett Horst. I think it is just one of those years, and I think that, like the phrase that Tucker keeps on using over and over again is complementary football. And I think that in some ways you can argue, like, of the three pieces of complementary football, the offense did the most to win this game. Obviously we talk about what they didn't do because they needed to score more points, and that's always going to be a focus. But I think when you look at the failures from last Saturday, first you got to look at defense, and now there's some reasons for why that happened with the lack of depth and whatnot, and then special teams. So no one wants to keep on talking about special teams over and over and over again because really there's some things you can't control with that. I mean, you can, but if your kicking operation isn't going to do you any good, then you've got to score points. So, we can say that the offense had failures, and that's what everyone's going to look at. That's what everyone looks at every week because people think you should score points on every single possession. And if you get a 3-and-out or if you have to punt, it's the fault of the offense. Well, football doesn't work that way. There's different pieces, and when you look at this Michigan State team, 5-6 on the year, they've lost games because pieces haven't been functioning where they need to at the right time. You can look at a lot of games where early in the season, defense was having a hard time. Offense wasn't doing its part to keep the defense fresh. In this past game, I think the offense probably could have done more to keep the defense fresh. And I go back to some of the hurry up stuff. Mm-hmm. And I wonder sometimes why. You want to keep your defense off the field. You want to eat clock. But again, I think when you look at what Michigan State did on offense, I think in a lot of ways they did enough to win that game. You've got to, even if they didn't score a point in the second half, there's that Indiana team should not, under normal circumstances, have been able to come back and win that game. Sure,
you scored 31 points. That should be enough. And your offense does enough to create 34 points, and you miss a field goal. The offense did their job on that one. Still, there's just little plays that are not getting finished. First play of overtime, Eli Collins gains about 13 yards on a real nice, pin and pull. You have left guard, left tackle pulling, and run game is still going well. First and goal at the 9-yard line, you get a false start. Now it's first and goal at the 14, and Peyton Thorne, who had a really good day, has an open receiver over the middle and misses him high. Maybe that's just because you get a little unnerved because why are we in overtime right now? You got to get back to neutral like Tucker talks about. I'm sure that's really hard to do. As much as these guys put into these games, it's out there, it's freezing cold, but to miss someone open on first and goal at the 14, now you got second down, and then from there they didn't end up scoring, and the field goal gets blocked high snap. Just all over the map. Everybody knows this. So one of the questions is, a lot of people are like, well, they're 5-6. They're going to end up 5-7, losing to Penn State. People might think that the season's a wrap. Why do we even care anymore? Why are we talking about it? To me, every week, whether it's March or April or August or October or the last week of November, it's all about player development, team development, foundational development, and momentum. Football, to me, college football is a 12-month process, whether it be recruiting or off-season, and you play. And in September, October, November, you play some games, look at the scoreboard, see where you are. We could see where Michigan State is, but, to me, when you get to be my age, I mean, it's going to be March soon. So, I mean, to me, I'm looking at Vandermark. I'm looking at Thorne. I mean, I'm wondering about the direction of the offense in general. So that's why we're still critiquing it, cutting it down, looking at the minutia. Yeah, you know, the bowl game situation is pretty dire in a lot of ways. But in terms of program development, still looking at guys like Malik Carr. Where do they stand? Where are the bright spots? Where are the negative spots? I'm always perpetually in spring practice mode, kind of. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do. I mean, like, one of the things we do is we do a lot of player development stuff, and that's the way it's always been. And so you're always looking forward. But the other thing, two things I'd like to point out is, you know, some of the same people that think the season should be over, no bowl game, are some of my recruitniks out there who want Michigan State to get every single recruit they possibly can. And in this day of NIL, I understand that that's not always going to be the case. But in my experience, in many cases, the first taste of a college campus that a recruit sees is during bowl practice. You know, when they're going around, they're starting to visit some teams, and they come in during December bowl practice. And if you can get those guys in there and the team can see, or the recruit can see how a team practices, you get a feel for how coaches coach, how they interact with their players. And then you can kind of start picturing yourself in that environment. And then the next most important thing is the unofficial visits that happen in early summer, and that type of thing, or over the course of the winter. And but that first taste of seeing a university playing actual football, practicing actual football, because when a lot of these kids start coming around on official visits, unofficial visits, they're not watching football. It's shorts and shirts. It's guys in the weight room. It's camps. So this is, I think, pretty important for a lot of players to come in and see guys working on football beyond, what it means to the program.
And that might be juniors or sophomores, but also with Michigan State recruiting this year, you've got 4 weeks till signing day. It seems to me we're still covering it, of course, but Michigan State is kind of offering more 3-stars right now that maybe weren't offered in the summer. So getting those guys on campus for a bowl practice. Now, I don't know how that would change when you get into morning practices after, in the past there were afternoon practices. So it was easier for high school kids to come in after school and watch bowl practices. What we're getting at is those bowl practices are important for the team and the program, also important for recruiting. But, sometimes a kid can miss school to go to watch a practice. So the recruiting aspect of having bowl practices is pretty important. Last week,
or many times they could spend the night. I mean, they could stay over with their families, take the tours in the afternoon, spend the night, see the morning practice the next day, that type of deal.
And like last week when everybody thought Michigan State was going to beat Indiana and people were talking about going to the Quick Lane Bowl, and, I've heard some talk show hosts, Michigan State people talking about, that would be it'd be a problem for Michigan State's alums, and just juxtapose that to where Michigan's going to be going. That's only if you're insecure as a person, and if you allow a college football team's success or lack thereof to reflect on you as a person, and you've got that insecurity, then you got other issues. I mean, if you support young athletes and you're trying to look to see what they can do in terms of improve for the next year and so forth, you shouldn't care about those things. Maybe that's easy for me to say because I don't spend much time at a water cooler dealing with people like that. But that comes down to whether individuals have insecurity about that. The people I heard talking, apparently they've got insecurity, but I know a lot of other people, they're like, hey, man, it's best for the program just keep practicing and have a bowl to go after. And that could end up with a 5-7 record even. We've talked about that on the message board. Michigan State's one of about 15 or 16 schools that are at 5 wins that need to get to 6 wins. There might not be enough bowl slots to fill all of them. So Michigan State, with a good graduation rate, could get in there and get slotted into a bowl game at 5-7. And not ideal, but if you can keep playing, that's better than not playing.
Yeah, it changes this to me. For me, it changes like the tenor of this weekend's game against Penn State a little bit, because I think Michigan State can come out and they can play their tails off, and I think they will. They're going to play hard. That doesn't mean, with the personnel shortages they have, with the issues they have in special teams, with all the different issues they have, that they're going to be able to, hang with Penn State. We've seen a lot of close games over the years in this matchup. You talk about teams that have someone else's number. This one has been pretty evenly matched, and I think if you polled some Penn State fans, they're probably a little bit leery of matchups with Michigan State, because Michigan State always seems to play Penn State tougher than some people expect, and they always seem to be right there And these games have been really close. So maybe that happens this weekend. Maybe it doesn't. You see Michigan State showing growth in the run game operation. To me, if that continued this week, although I don't think Penn State has a great run defense, I think that they're better than they were last year in a run defense operation.
And they're better than they were 4 weeks ago. They've improved that.
Right.
They were terrible against Michigan, but they've improved that.
So, do I expect Michigan State to come out and run like they did against Illinois? Well, I don't think so. That remains to be seen. I think they'll give it, as much effort as they can. I think you're going to see, Peyton Thorne's going to be involved in the run game a little bit this week, and I think everyone's going to give it, their absolute best shot. But I think Michigan State could play as good as they possibly can play under the circumstances and still lose this game by a couple touchdowns or more.
Michigan State's run offense has come alive the last 3 weeks. That's positive. A lot of those offensive linemen will be coming back next year, and they had a good ground game against Indiana. That's positive. But it's going to be a tough game because Penn State's playing on defense smarter. They're running harder. They're not. The gap assignments are a lot better. Tucker, I mentioned that in the VCast after the game on Saturday. Tucker mentioned it on Monday. They've improved. The way they destroyed Maryland was impressive, 30-0 or whatever that was. I realize Maryland's not very good, but they're not bad. And Penn State really has been waxing people here the last couple of weeks, and they're going to try to close it out. If Penn State wins, they're number 11 in the country. If Penn State wins, they'll probably get a New Year's Six bowl. They'll be a top 10 team. They'll get one of those bowl games. And if they do that, that moves all the Big Ten bowls up. And I don't know where that leaves Michigan State. The Big Ten teams. I don't know if you still end up getting the Quick Lane Bowl at 5 and 7. I don't know, but Michigan State's out here practicing hard. They got to just be kicking themselves over letting that Indiana game get away.
But they can't be thinking about that right now. Otherwise this is going to be even worse. You have to move forward, and I think they've done that in the past. I thought they did a really nice job. They've done a nice job moving forward under difficult circumstances. I'd be surprised if they could harness the same thing that got harnessed at Illinois, because I think in some ways Penn State's a better team than Illinois.
What about what Tucker said yesterday, that they've not been able to tackle in practice? Well, not really tackle, but even hit for the last 3 weeks. And he says this week is the 4th week. He's never had that in a college situation before. They've had it in the NFL before. He thinks that's one of the reasons that the run defense has gone south on them. And Michigan State's run defense against Michigan was good, even though Michigan got a lot of yards. They didn't get the big one, and Michigan was really hammering an excellent running attack at Michigan State. You're talking about a guy that's going to be a finalist for the Heisman. You're talking about a top 5 program. There aren't many running attacks in the country that are as good as Michigan. Right. And Michigan was in there hell-bent to blow Michigan State out, and Michigan was very good. And Michigan State's defense just kept showing up, correct, collision. And despite the numbers they gave up, played good run defense that day. Very good run defense the next week against Illinois. I know that Chase Brown had over 100 yards rushing, but in terms of per carry average, Illinois was held below their average that day. They had 37 tailback runs, and Michigan State kept them contained against a very good running attack. So even though those numbers were high, Michigan State's running attack those 2 weeks were good. Then Rutgers, it really fell off, and against Indiana, really fell off. The irony there is Rutgers and Indiana came into these games with poor rushing attacks, but they had success against Michigan State. Tucker offered an explanation as to why that happened. It makes total sense to me. That's where Michigan State is right now. They're low on numbers on defense. They're not able to thud and hit much here late in the season, and you can even say the intensity dropped down, because the intensity was high for Michigan and high for Illinois. They tried, but they were a court low there. But I'm just looking for, as you take temperature on the whole program as a whole, run defense, after the game, I'm like, man, that's a problem. You're not going to be good until and unless you get the run defense straightened out. But that was something I wasn't aware of. That makes me pause and say, well, that kind of makes sense.
Well, I mean, the numbers are enough for me to, like when you think about having Jalen Hunt as a defensive end and him getting option and whatnot, that's enough for me to say, okay, they don't have the bodies. Because, when Michael Fletcher and Avery Dunn were in there at defensive end, I thought they were pretty solid for the most part. And you go back to the Illinois game, Michigan State was really salty on short yardage situations. And that's in some ways a true test for a run defense. This makes sense, the not hitting. I think go back and you think of that COVID year in basketball, and Michigan State had a bunch of games, in a short span. And Gabe Brown got COVID, and I think someone else did as well. there's a couple games where Michigan State didn't have the bodies and they just had to do it in walkthroughs. I can't remember who they played.
They had to take 28 days off too. Remember that?
I can't remember who they played. Oh, Iowa. They went out to Iowa, basically preparing and just doing walkthroughs, no contact, no real practice. And Iowa beat the snot out of them, 30 points or 20 points or whatever it has. So, and there's other instances in a short turnaround situation, even with a healthy Michigan State basketball. And we know how into defense, into physicality and all that Tom Izzo is, but there's been a number of situations over the years when you've got a short turnaround, you're coming off a road trip and you have to give a guy a rest or whatever, and you can't practice physically, and we all see what happens. The defense is just not right. The close are slow. The physicality is different. I've noticed now that I know, so it happens, and there's no, people say, well, that's an excuse. Well, yeah, there's lots of excuses. Michigan State doesn't have the numbers. If they had their guys, it'd be different. So I don't understand how you can, evaluate Michigan State through a normal lens when there's so many different things affecting, the team. Numbers being a really big deal, lack of practice being a really big deal. And I think where it shows is the first defensive possession of every single game. If you've noticed, it seems like in this last 4-week span, I didn't go back and look at it, but it seems like it takes Michigan State one series on defense to kind of get into the flow because they're not hitting. Like last week, Indiana marched down the field, scored a touchdown. It seems like these teams have marched down the field on Michigan State, the first series of every single one of these games where there's been no physicality in practice, and it really feels like there's an on-field adjustment going on where these guys are getting used to hitting again. I don't know how you correct that, but that's kind of just my impression, and it makes a little bit more sense to me now, whereas I think in the past I might have been like, these guys aren't dialed in, or, Indiana's got their number, or, they need to up the intensity. Well, it is what it is at this point. So what I'm going to be looking for in this game is, are these guys competing as hard as they can every single snap, and our guys spilling it, 100%. I'm sure that's what the coaches are going to be looking for, because like I said, even if you play your A game under these circumstances, there's no guarantee you're going to be that close.
Right. And frankly, we're looking at it in terms of evaluating the team, including the coaches. Right. So, Scotty Hazelton has been critiqued a lot by fans and so forth. They were starting to turn it around, and then this. So that factors into it as you evaluate him, and you're looking at who he's had to use at defensive end, getting down to third-string defensive tackles in there.
But you're looking at like a guy like Deshaun Mallory. Like coming out of the Illinois game, Deshaun Mallory got hurt in that game, but he played really, really good. That was his third game at defensive end, and I thought he'd made a ton of progress. I didn't see that coming. And I think you've got to look at Hazelton and say, hey, man, this guy made lemonade with lemons. Yeah. And then you don't have that guy. And then all of a sudden you're basically playing with three. And you really didn't have Michael Fletcher.
He didn't play against Rutgers.
Yeah,
Mallory played well
Rutgers.
against Illinois.
Michael Fletcher didn't play much against Rutgers. So that's a guy coming off an injury. So you're really, in a situation where Michigan State pretty much had to go with Jalen Hunt and Avery Dunn at defensive end against Rutgers. And so I don't know how you can be –
That's a third-string defensive tackle and third-string defensive end 2 months ago.
I don't know how you can be super critical of, Scotty Hazelton based on personnel. At some point, personnel matters. And when you get that far down – you're talking about dudes like Deshaun Mallory, Michael Fletcher weren't even on the travel roster at the beginning of the season. You're talking about guys that weren't on the travel roster playing in starting roles, and you want to run a guy out of town for getting the most out of them. Whether or not they're up to the task is, it remains to be seen. But the fact that he's getting anything out of those two guys and they're playing close to winning football, to me, it speaks well of Scotty Hazelton.
It's just hard to evaluate. I wish that Michigan State did have a full complement of players on defense, because then if they were still this bad, then it'd be more cut and dried and clear.
Right.
And I asked Cal Halliday this today, about that 78-yard touchdown run. You go back and look at it, and Halliday, it's a formation where they got three receivers over there, so you got Xavier Henderson over there as a safety, and a lot of the defense is over there. 5 offensive linemen, I think 6. I think the tight end was attached over here on this side. The guy goes for 78 yards. the way Michigan State's situated, there's one linebacker in the hole. I mean, that's the whole idea of spread to run. You spread out the numbers and you put it all on one guy to make a tackle in space. So the one guy that had that gap was Halliday, and he's in the space. He's back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Week in the Big Ten, 20 tackles against Rutgers. He's in the hole. He's the guy with the chance to make a tackle, and he gets pushed from behind. It's an illegal block. And you go watching the end zone replay, he can't make the tackle. Guy gets out, touchdown. I asked him, did you get pushed in the back? And he's like, yeah, And I asked him a follow-up question, would you have made the tackle if you had not been illegally blocked? Because he didn't come out and say it was illegal. But he says, things happen. I should have pressed it sooner. He blamed himself. He wasn't making any excuses. But how different is that game if, hey, kicker's got to do his job, make the field goal. In overtime, the snapper's got to do his job. Thorne, very good player, but the high passer talked about that, but the referee's got to do his job too. Right. And if he had done his job, that touchdown right there doesn't. And I hate to say it, but the kickoff return, Mangum got pushed in the back. Both of those plays could have been called back. So a lot of the conversation this week is, how did Michigan State get to the point where they were in overtime? Michigan State made a lot of mistakes. There are other mistakes too, and that happens a lot in football. But for those two plays in a game in which at one point first downs were 21-5. 21-5 were first downs late in the third quarter. They needed those two plays. They got them, but they also needed some officials not to see some things which helped spring those plays.
Yeah, and then you go to the Peyton Thorne interception. That should have been a flag as well. But I said this to you earlier this week, and I firmly believe it. Having been outside a lot when it's cold, watching my kids ski, and I'm sitting there as a gate judge out there for 2 hours in the wind or 3 hours, and I'm supposed to take notes, and I'm sitting there shivering, and then I get on the phone in the inside the lodge to tell my parents how my kids did skiing, and I sound like unintelligible. It's like,
because your face doesn't work.
Your face doesn't work. You're shivering. You're cold as heck, and everything kind of starts shutting down a little bit. Your senses start shutting down. And when the official was doing the coin toss in overtime, he could barely talk. Like he was so cold out there, and he was pretty unintelligible. And so that kind of stuff happens. The point is there's like a million little things that went wrong for Michigan State, without which they probably win that game. Under the circumstances, it really sucks for Michigan State. But moving forward, they're playing against a Penn State team where pretty much everything has to go right for Michigan State, in my opinion, to win that game. Mm-hmm. It's not, they can't have deals where an official misses a pick or something like that. But that's not going to happen. So it's easy to blame a lot of different guys. But it should be collective ownership. Did they play well enough to win? Yeah, they probably did in a lot of ways. But
a lot of guys graded out well.
The special team, yeah. But then you get into the special teams, 164 kick return yards in that game. Okay, so any like catastrophic breakdowns in one area are going to overcome a lot of good play, and you see that time.
I think about that, like Tucker. I think when he first came in, talked about wanting to use more starters on special teams. Didn't he say that once? Yeah. I think so. But you look at the kickoff coverage, there's not many starters out there, but they're not practicing during the week for these reasons. Right. So you don't want to have Xavier Henderson on kickoff coverage. You don't want to have Charles Brantley. All these guys have gotten dinged up. So you've got a bunch of guys that haven't hit all week, and that opening kickoff that they returned 43 yards at the 50-yard line, you got a lot of guys that just look to me like not making much contact. Dylan Tatum made contact. Jaden Mangum made contact. Everybody else was out there just kind of, they look like non-starters who hadn't hit all week. Yeah. And it gets out. Secondly, you get this late in the season when it's cold, your kickoffs don't reach the end zone. You got a kicker from Texas. He's a true freshman. So his kickoffs, which were going to the goal line in September or October, are now going to the 7-yard line against a very dangerous kickoff return. All those things happen. I'll say one other thing about the officials that went against Michigan, or that went for Michigan State in overtime. I think there was a check down over here to Eli Collins for 5 yards. I think that's what it was. J.D. Duplain was illegal man downfield by 7 yards. Yeah, I saw that. And the officials didn't call that either. So the officials just kind of checked out on some plays. And that one, it helped Michigan State, but that was par for the course on that day.
Yeah.
All right, so Michigan State, Penn State, going to be a tough one for the Spartans. I wouldn't be surprised if they come out and hit hard and do well. Hey, Michigan State's got a pretty good quarterback in Peyton Thorne. Not perfect, but what he's done in bad conditions last 2 or 3 weeks, he's played winning football. Got to finish. The run game has come alive a little bit. Berger's playing pretty well. Collins playing pretty well. Collins messed up that directional run at the end of regulation could have made all the difference in what we're talking about right now. If he takes it to the middle like he's assigned to, I wonder what kind of corrections he got, and and he was playing with great heart,
right.
And that's why he was getting those carries, because he was close to popping one.
Yeah, and you look back at what he did out there, even when he was in on passing downs. That was the best running back pass protection I've seen since Jeremy Langford.
And the 4th and 2 play that Michigan State messed up with Daniel Barker being in the area, it's 4th and 2 because Eli Collins turned a 3-yard pass play into an 8-yard pass play by making someone miss, breaking a tackle, and driving forward to set up 4th and 2. Eli Collins was a hero coming down the stretch in that game, and then that mistake. Everybody did real well, but everybody made that one little mistake for an unnerving ending to the regular season at home for Michigan State. They got a chance to make it right against a good Penn State team on Saturday. We'll be there to check it out and see what Michigan State can do and where the season goes from there. For anything else, Paul? For Paul Konyndyk, Jim Comparoni, been watching the VCast from Spartan Stadium with the Spartans for SpartanMag.com.